Hi ladies and gentlemen, this is Mrs. Haverstock and I'm ready to teach you about Chapter 3, Lesson 7, the distributive property and partial quotients. So I'm really looking forward to sharing some strategies with you on how to divide, and one way to do that is to kind of take what we already know. How many times do we say that, right? Take what we already know and add on to our thinking. So we learned about the distributive property already. So let me remind you a little bit about that. Remember when we said 3 times 27. When we use the distributive property, we see that as 3 times 20 plus 7, remember? And we would distribute the 3 to each one of our add-ins. So we would say 3 times 20 plus 3 times 7. We could do some quick mental math and know that that was 60 plus 21, and that was 81 as a total. So the distributive property really helped us with multiplication. All right, well now I want to share with you how we can use that same distributive property, but think about it with division. So now I'm thinking to myself, all right, if I have the number, let's say I have, so remember, we see things in the inverse or opposite way when we use division. So let's try this one. Let's try 369 divided by 3. I don't see the number 369 as being a problem because I'm going to break it up just like we broke up this one over here. So we're going to break up 300 plus 60 plus 9 divided by 3. It's the same problem, right? And I need to distribute my 3 into each one of those add-ins. But again, I'm making sure that I go to each one of them, right? So let's say 300 divided by 3. That's my first one. Plus 60 divided by 3 plus 9 divided by 3. That's going to be my problem and how I solve it. So 300 divided by 3 is 100, plus 60 divided by 3 is 20, plus 9 divided by 3 is 3. And my answer is 123. I can use the distributive property to divide problems. Well, let's try another screen. So now that I'm looking at this again, I want to share with you a model to use with the distributive property. So let's go back to that same problem, 369 divided by 3. In your notes now, you're going to write this again. This time when I show the problem, I'm going to do the same things. I'm going to take the 300 and the 60 and the 9 and go ahead and write those out and continue with the divided by 3. This time I'm going to take a break from writing all the steps and I'm going to draw our rectangle. Do you remember this from when we used the distributive property with multiplication? So we're drawing this rectangle and we're going to put each one into a section. So here's my 300, here's my 60, and here's my 9. My divisor goes on the outside and the quotient will go along the top. So 300 divided by 3 is still 100, and 60 divided by 3 is still 20, and 9 divided by 3 is still 3. I add those together, and now I can write my answer, 369 divided by 3 equals 123. Using the distributive property, I can divide large numbers. All right, that's the distributive property, but let's keep going and let's talk this time about partial quotients. Okay, so now that you have partial quotients in the next part of your notes, will you please make sure to write down this definition? Partial quotients are a method of dividing where you break the dividend into add-ins that are easy to divide. So let me show you how that works. let's say I have the number 738 divided by 6. So I take my number and then I write it with our division bracket so that I can do some math figuring. And this is a pretty large number, so I want to do my best to use my mental math skills. I can say 6 goes into 7 and do the long division the way we've done it in the past, or I can start thinking about numbers in a big way. I can say 6 goes into this 700, right? This is a 700, so I know 6 goes into 700 about 100 times. So here's how we set it up differently. Let me change my color a pinch here. This, when we do partial quotients, is pretty fun. You know that 6 times 100 is 600. So if I multiply 100 times 6, I get 600. I can use the whole number. Then I subtract and I get 138. Now I can think about that zeros trick that we've been learning so much about, remember? So now if I'm thinking about the zeros trick, 6 goes into 138. Well, if I said 2, that would be a small number, but if I say 20, I know 6 times 20 is 120, right? Zeros trick, zeros trick. I can write that down. 20 is what I multiplied by. 6 times 20 is 120. I subtract and get 18. Oh, that one's a piece of cake, right? 6 goes into 18 3 times. 3 times 6 is 18, and I have a remainder of 0. Now this information here on the side of my division problem is the reason we call it partial quotients. I've got part of the quotient right here. Do you notice that I lined up my ones column, my tens column, and my hundreds column? So I'm looking at that and I'm going to add those up. I add the number 123. My quotient is 123. So 738 divided by 6 equals 123. Let's try another one just for fun, right? Okay, let's try this problem. 942 divided by 3. If I want to use partial quotients, I'll write it out underneath the bracket and then I'll draw my line. So I'm reminded that I'm going to keep my partial quotients on the right side of the line, and then my answers to those problems will be on the left. So let's take a minute and look at that. Remember, 3 goes into 942. I got to think big. So 3 goes into 900. Oh, using the zeros trick, I know there's my basic fact, and then I can add my zeros. 300 times 3 is 900. I subtract, just like in the other process, and bring down. 3 into 42, gee, I'm not so good with my 3s, so I think I'm just going to put 10. 3 times 10 is 30. Subtract and I get 12. Oh, yeah. And now 3 times 4 is 12, and I have a remainder of 0. Add my partial quotients, and my answer is 342. That's my quotient, 342. Nope, sorry, 314. I wrote it, didn't say it right. But I want to show you one other thing that's really interesting about partial quotients. Watch this for me, will ya? If I've got my problem, and now I'm going to try to do it again, but let's say I have a different mindset. Let's say I know that 3 times 200 is 600. I can do the subtraction, come up with 342. Oh, 3 times 100 is 300. Subtract and get 42. Oh, 3 times 11 is 33. Subtract and get 9. 3 times 3 is 9. And I still have a remainder of 0. But I've got all of these on the other side. My job is still to add my quotients, add my partial quotients. Let's see what I get. What? That is math magic, ladies and gentlemen. Partial quotients is a great strategy. I can use the mental math ideas that I know. and I still end up, when done correctly, with the exact same quotient. Partial quotients is a great tool. So if you could please, ladies and gentlemen, will you complete both of these problems in your Math Spiral notebook right now? I'd like you to solve them with the distributive property. Write them down and then push pause, solve the problems, and you can click back on for the answers. All right, so your answers should have popped back on that screen, and that's the distributive property for solving division problems. Let's move to the next one. Here we're going to practice solving problems with the partial quotients method. All right, ladies and gentlemen, so this time I'd like you to try and solve these problems with the partial quotients method. If you could please copy them both down and then press pause. When you've completed them, you may hit play again and the answers will pop on the screen. So there are our answers. Remember, with partial quotients, there's different ways to arrive at the same answer. So you might have chosen different multipliers for number 5. If you did, that's fine, as long as you end up with 135 as your answer. So thinking carefully about that, make sure you're always checking your work to show all your thinking. All right, we're on our last slide, and this will just be our directions for the next step in your lesson. So there are your last directions, ladies and gentlemen. Make sure that you work on those independent practice page. 198 is the page, numbers 9 through 12, and then check your work on Schoology. Thanks for working really hard, and we look forward to seeing you again.